and Charlie Creme of ESPN. Charlie, welcome to the set and BYU Sports Nation.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is tremendous. What a game.
Yeah, fantastic game between BYU and San Francisco. And a lot of people wondering, well, what happens to the BYU women's team now because they didn't win the West Coast Conference Championship. And so I guess we'll start there. BYU, you had them as a 6 seed before today's result. What happens to the Cougars now that they lost by 2 points to San Francisco?
Well, I think everybody would be happy to hear that not much. There's too many teams they would have to have fallen back to or behind to go from a 6 to a 7. So I still have them as a 6. They were 22 overall on my board coming into today. I think maybe I'm going to jump Miami to the 22 spot, but BYU to 23. But I don't see them falling any further than that. Tennessee would be next, and perhaps you could say Tennessee jumps them, but that still puts BYU at 24. Oklahoma was 25, and BYU, in my mind, has a greater body of work and has done a little bit more winning their conference in the regular season easily to be that at least that last number 6 seed.
So even though Oklahoma beat BYU head-to-head very early, it's at this point you got to go by body of work.
Exactly. Head-to-head plays a role, no question about it. And sometimes it will break a tie, so to speak. But usually what the committee does is they group teams in bunches. It's not a one-on-one situation normally, and they vote on these teams in bunches. And so head-to-head is taken into consideration, but there are so many other things that go into the pile that I think still, the way I've seen it all year, that I would put BYU ahead of Oklahoma, and perhaps still have to look at it even more deeply, but I think even ahead of Tennessee.
Charlie, had BYU won that game, would you have moved them up at all or kept them at 6?
I think they would have still been a 6.
Okay.
Penetrating that top 20 on my list would have been very difficult, given the same types of circumstances. So they really didn't have anything to gain or lose today, other than obviously they wanted to win a WCC tournament championship. But it doesn't hurt them in the big picture in my mind. And it is obviously great for the league, because if BYU wins the game, the WCC gets that one team in. Now it gets 2.
So for a non-Power 5 team like BYU coming out of the West Coast Conference, has Jeff Judkins and his crew and scheduling figured out how to get a single-digit seed? Have they figured out the formula here?
Pretty close. He's got it figured out as well as any other coach at these kind of conferences. The scheduling of the tournaments in November that take you places, Hawaii in the case this year. There's a tournament here in Vegas every year at the South Point, where this year a bunch of teams got together. And in fact, BYU beat Texas A&M in Hawaii. Well, A&M was right before that, was at the tournament at the South Point here in Vegas. So Texas A&M went from College Station to Las Vegas to Hawaii. They weren't back home for, I think it was about 10 days.
Wow. Perfect timing for the Cougars.
Exactly. They were ripe for the picking by the time that the Cougars got them in that Hawaii tournament. But getting involved in those, certainly, and then scheduling a Power 5 here or there when you can, it certainly helps. And then it helps actually the whole league, because then a Santa Clara plays BYU and it helps their RPI. Same for San Francisco or Gonzaga. So it has a sort of domino effect. The Pac-12 has done that probably better than anybody now in the last couple of years. But there are certain programs, BYU being one of them, that have gotten a handle on. You don't want to overschedule, because you don't want your record to reflect maybe a 19-13 type season, but you can't ever underschedule. I think it's more detrimental to underschedule than it is if you overschedule and don't win quite as many games.
Sure.
Can we talk about RPI for a second? Because that metric is used so heavily, yet there are times where I look at that and I go, does that really reflect how good a team? What do you think of RPI? Do you use it heavily?
I use it heavily because that's what the committee uses. They look at that. But there's other metrics too. And I'll say this, people who don't like RPI, usually the people who don't like it are the ones whose team aren't as high as they would like them.
Maybe that's why I don't like it as much.
That makes sense.
Right. And if people who embrace it as their arguing point, say they love it this year, and maybe next year they hate it. But there are other metrics too. There's the Massey, there's the Jeff Sagarin, and I would ask anybody to look at all of those and say that they didn't scratch their head at something in each of those metric formulas. Right now, I use them all, or I look at them all. The committee doesn't claim to use everything other than RPI in terms of the mathematical formulas, but I have a feeling they probably look at them. It's a good way to balance the RPI. And for instance, BYU, great RPI, they're high 50s in Jeff Sagarin's ratings. Huge disparity.
Wow.
And that's one of those things where you scratch your head, because maybe some people would say, well, BYU's not the 15th best team in the country like the RPI would suggest, but they're certainly not the 58th or 59th best team either. So take them all with a grain of salt. Use them as one of the ingredients in your soup. And then you've got to just consider everything. That's what the committee does. But the RPI is heavily used because it's the top 50 wins are based off the RPI, and strength of schedule is usually based off the RPI. So, yeah, it's the one that gets the most attention and gets the most usage. And so that's what I follow is more closely than the others. But there's every year there's a head scratcher or 2 or 10. And you just have to kind of measure it against what you've seen. Committee members watch games. I watch a lot of games, and all the other things that go into it as well.
ESPN's Charlie Creme, women college basketball bracketologist, with us at the Orleans Arena. Just wrapped up the West Coast Conference Championships. BYU playing in an improved West Coast Conference, and you look at the power metrics, and that all factors into where a team goes. How difficult or how challenging is the West Coast Conference this year from a national standpoint compared to other conferences?
Well, I thought it was a real competitive league, at least maybe after BYU. Eventually, BYU kind of stretched out things and won the league fairly comfortably. But earlier in the year, I had a lot of West Coast Conference teams kind of grouped into those at-large, last teams in, first teams out type thing. Santa Clara at one point was in the mix. San Diego was on my list for a long time. St. Mary's still really was up until yesterday or today. All in the conversation. As it turned out, none of them were going to get in, besides BYU is in at large. But it is a reflection of the conference's improvement and the fact that in all of that, I never even mentioned Gonzaga, who's been the team in the league for years and years and years, is a testament to the league getting deeper.
When you mentioned watching games is important, does the fact that the BYU women are on TV a ton, does that help in any way, especially when they're good?
Oh, absolutely. But the committee members can get games. Usually what happens is committee members are assigned conferences during the course of the year, and they're pledged to kind of watch as many of those games as they can, and they bring back the information to the group. And they can get DVDs and get games in any way they want. If they have a game they want to request, they can get it. But certainly it does help when it's easy, when you can put your feet up. Maybe you're living on the East Coast as a committee member, and you come home and you've got DirecTV, and you fire up the BYU network and you watch.
Listen to Spencer.
Exactly.
the dulcet tones, right? Yeah.
And with that, you're nice and relaxed, and you're able to enjoy a BYU Pepperdine game and get a feel right then and there without having to kind of cram with all the DVDs. So, yeah, it certainly helps. It's anytime you can get more games on TV and in front of more eyeballs, the Pac-12 network is a perfect example of that. That's also helped grow that conference. The Big Ten network has helped the Big Ten, although some people would say, well, it didn't really need that much help. But those things are big deals in big picture stuff and in little picture stuff when we're trying to determine who gets in and who stays home.
I know you're good friends with Joe Lunardi, who does bracketology on the men's side, and you've been working together in a sidebar conversation we had now for about 20 years, right? More than 20 years?
Wow, that's hard to hear when you say it out loud. But yeah, it's true. It ages both of us. But for the record, Joe's older than I am.
All right. Hey, listen. If they call him Joey Brackets, can we call you Charlie Brackets?
I'm all for it.
Are
Why
you
not?
cool with
Sure,
that?
Yeah, I'll take any nickname.
Okay. Charlie Creme, a.k.a. Charlie Brackets, with us on BYU Sports Nation. Great insight. We appreciate the time.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to be here. You guys do a fabulous job, and it's a pleasure to join you.